Hey folks, Dale Davidson here, Davidson Law Offices here in Southwest Georgia. Glad you're here today. Hey, let's just jump into it today. What is asset protection? Okay, so asset protection is basically a set of strategies and legal tools that lawyers use, like myself, for protecting assets from lawsuits and claims of creditors. Now, here in our offices, we use asset protection trust to preserve and protect your assets from being spent down on your long-term care. For instance, if you have to go into a nursing home. By the way, there are no good nursing homes out there. Some of them are pretty, but nobody wants to be there. Everybody wants to stay at home, and that's what our goal is. So here's how it works. Okay, so we use tools such as asset protection trust to preserve and protect assets from nursing homes. Now, why is that? Because they're expensive. So the average cost of a nursing home here in Georgia is somewhere between $90,000 and $100,000 a year. Assisted living is somewhere around $85,000 to $95,000 a year, and then home care is upwards of $60,000 a year. So you can see it's expensive to live. Now, realize that if you're in a nursing home and you have a spouse, that spouse still has to live too, right? So that's part of our asset protection, to make sure that your spouse is taken care of. And realize that if you're in a nursing home, you still have your taxes, insurance, upkeep, and maintenance on your home. So how is all that going to get paid? So that's part of our planning process. So let me talk about asset protection trust in general, then I'm going to slip down and we're just going to talk about the long-term aspects of them, the one that we normally use. So you've probably heard of offshore trust. These are some of the most powerful tools. And why? Well, because they're offshore. Local courts don't have any power over a trustee that may be in Panama or Dubai or wherever the offshore trust is located. Now, recently, 15 years or so ago, different states started passing these domestic asset protection laws so that you could create a trust in their state and you would be afforded some degree of protection. For instance, Nevada, Alaska, Delaware, those things. Now, while they're useful, the domestic ones, they're not as effective as the offshore. But we don't use those kinds of trusts because they're just way too expensive and they're highly specialized. And our client's goal is to really preserve and protect their assets from spin down for a nursing home. And we've gotten really good success from just using our asset protection trust here. Okay, so we use a lot of these I call them nursing home asset protection trusts, to preserve and protect my clients, or your assets from spin down. So, because recall that if you go into a nursing home, your assets can't exceed a certain amount. For instance, the person going to the nursing home, his or her assets can't be more than $2,000. Now, there's some exemptions to that, but we'll get into those later. But then the surviving spouse, his or her assets can't exceed a certain amount. That's about $138,000. Okay, so it's not a whole lot of assets to preserve and protect for the non-institutionalized spouse, but that's what we do. Okay. So a properly established nursing home asset protection plan performs three primary functions. Number one, we're trying to avoid spend down, meaning we're trying to avoid having to spend $100,000 on a nursing home. Okay. Now, if you've got land and things of that nature, and you're trying to preserve and protect that for future generations, you're way over the asset limit, and so therefore you're going to have to spend some of that down. Okay, but we have ways of avoiding that. Okay, we're trying to preserve your assets for your long-term health and well-being, and we're trying to at the same time kind of protect your children from their creditors. And we're talking about creditors, we're talking about divorces and creditors. Okay, so the nursing home asset protection trust, they'll hold certain assets, and as a result, those assets are not countable for Medicaid eligibility purposes. Now, we've got a time frame in there, a look back period that we're going to be dealing with, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But certain assets we don't put in the trust. We don't put in IRAs. We don't put in 401ks. Okay, we leave outside of these trusts your Social Security, your pensions, your required minimum distributions from your IRAs or your 401ks. So we're leaving out your income, but we like to preserve and protect assets such as houses, other real estate like farmland, and other types of maybe highly valuable assets. That's what we're trying to put into the trust to make sure that those assets are preserved and protected for your long-term health and well-being. Now, don't be mistaken. I mean, just because we're putting in the trust doesn't mean that you can have just unfettered access, to these assets. These assets that are put in trust could not be accessible to you or your spouse, but they're accessible to other people, such as, we call them lifetime beneficiaries, and these are often children or close relatives. So you can't have any direct ownership or control over these assets. Otherwise, then those assets would be counted against you for eligibility purposes, and that's what we're trying to avoid, is avoiding the spin down. So in these types of trusts, a lot of people say, well, why don't I just gift my house, or put my child's name on my house, or checking account, or farmland, or whatever it may be. Now, these types of trusts, and unlike the outright gifting, there are several advantages to creating an asset protection plan trust, okay? So although you've basically given up these assets or given them away, put them into the trust, deposited them into the trust, you can retain certain powers over those assets. Okay, the assets are protected from, I talked about this a little bit earlier, the assets are protected inside the trust from the lifetime beneficiary's life circumstances. Your children, for instance, maybe they have a bad marriage, maybe they have lawsuits or debts, potential creditors, gambling, whatever, substance abuse, whatever their issues might be. Those assets are protected, from their creditors and those issues. Now, if you put their name on those assets, then those creditors can get to them. You put your kid's name on your bank account, if they have to declare bankruptcy, then you're having to fight with the bankruptcy trustee to say, this is my bank account. I put Junior's name on here for convenience purposes only. He doesn't own any part of this bank account, but you're going to have to spend time, money, and stress on getting him removed. Likewise, if you put your name, or put his name or her name on the real estate, same thing happens, and you don't want that. Now, under these types of trust, now your spouse could receive income if the trust is so designed. You could reserve your spouse the right to change who ultimately receives the trust assets upon your spouse's death. For instance, you say, well, I've got 4 kids and one of them is kind of estranged. I'm just going to leave it to the trust to my spouse, and I'm going to give her the power to say, look, if my son ever comes back into the fold, she can include him, okay? Or exclude somebody. Okay, or skip children and go to grandchildren, whatever. Okay, so funding of the nursing home asset protection trust requires that you give up all rights, title, and interest to those assets used to fund the trust. And a lot of people that I talk to, they're uncomfortable with giving up control. But after we discuss the important features and what we can do to assure that they will have some degree of control, but not enough control to impact their eligibility, then a lot of times they'll agree to those types of trust. And we've been very successful over the years doing that. So control is an issue, but I think the benefits of these trusts far outweigh those concerns, and we'll explain those to you when we meet. Like I said earlier, some assets always remain outside of these types of trust for liquidity purposes. For example, we don't touch your Social Security, your pension, your required minimum distributions from your IRAs or your 401ks. We don't want you or your spouse to change your lifestyle. Many people in these situations, they're not consuming all of their income, and so they're accumulating, which is a good thing. But if you have to go into a nursing home, those assets could be used, or as far as eligibility purposes, those assets would be counted against you for eligibility purposes and make you spend those down. Keep in mind, though, that these types of trusts are always going to be subject to the Medicaid eligibility or look-back period, and currently that's 60 months. This is a term used by Medicaid as a period in which the Medicaid agency gets to look back 60 months into your bank accounts and assets and things of that nature and say, hey, tell me, what have you transferred out? And if you did, what's the value of that? And if you did, and there's a value attached to it, then we're going to attach a penalty period for that. And basically what that is just saying you're going to be ineligible for a period of months until you make up that gift back. You just got to be mindful of that. But again, we've been able to successfully work around those look-back periods using various techniques. So don't worry about the look-back period. It is a concern, but it's not one that most times cannot be dealt with. So what is the difference between a nursing home asset protection trust and a revocable trust or a living trust? Now, we just talked about the nursing home asset protection trust as an asset protection trust from nursing home expenses or spend down. The revocable trust or the living trust is not an asset protection trust. So you don't get those asset protections with the living trust or the revocable trust. Here we used the revocable or living trust for asset management, financial decisions making, and avoiding probate. So this plan allows you to put your assets into the trust to be managed by you, either alone or with somebody else. So you get to manage your assets and your income. You receive income from the trust, and you can get the principal out of the trust. You have complete control over those trust assets. So you have direct access. Not so with the irrevocable trust or the nursing home asset protection trust. Okay? Further, under the revocable trust and the living trust, you retain the power to alter, amend, revoke the trust at any time. Not true with the nursing home asset protection trust. Now, the revocable trust and a living trust, however you want to term it, together with the asset protection trust, they both avoid probate. So upon your death, trust assets are distributed to your beneficiaries as stated in the trust, unlike a will where you'd have to go through probate. So let's talk about gift and estate taxes. There's no gift tax upon funding of your revocable living trust like there is with the asset protection trust. However, upon your death, the value of the trust is included as part of your estate for state tax purposes. But I'm not really worried about estate taxes currently because the exclusion is so high. I'm more worried about your long-term care and the cost of that. So, Medicaid eligibility assets in the revocable or the living trust are considered available for purposes of determining your eligibility. So, asset protection trust, the nursing home asset protection trust, assuming we're outside the 60-month look-back period, they are not considered available for eligibility purposes. So one of the big issues that we deal with is Medicaid estate recovery. And this is very state specific. As a general rule, Medicaid can only recover against assets in your probate estate, except for there are certain states that they have expanded estate recovery. Just check with your local, an elder law attorney in your area. Because assets are funded into your revocable or living trust would not be part of your probate estates, those assets theoretically could avoid the Medicaid claim for estate recovery. Kind of in summary here, ideally what you need to do is you need to engage in asset protection planning prior to a major life impacting incident requiring that you be placed, we say, in a protected environment, nursing home. Okay? Anything can happen at any time of the day or night, heart attacks, strokes, whatever it may be. Ideally what we need to do is proactively plan versus plan in a crisis. We make better decisions. We have more techniques available to us than we do in a crisis situation. So plan now for your future. Hey folks, check out this video that I did a couple months ago. It's going to explain the differences between a revocable or living trust and an irrevocable trust. So until next time, have a blessed day.